Israel is on a warpath against Iran's axis of resistance. As the world holds its breath for Israel's response to Iranian missiles, the Middle East appears to be closer than ever to a full-out war. Just how Israel responds could impact the future of the Middle East and the Islamic Republic as we know it. Jonathan Conricus, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former IDF spokesperson, joins us with the inside look. I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. The question on everyone's mind right now is when and how will Israel likely strike back against Iran?
Yeah, well, Shalom. Thank you for having me on your podcast. A pleasure. I wish we were here during different circumstances, but we are discussing very, very serious topics. Many in Israel would say that this is the best opportunity that Israel will ever have to deal directly with the source of violence and instability in the region, to deal with Israel's number one enemy and the main enemy that is supporting all of its other troubles in the region, the Iranian proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, etc. And that kind of thought is driving Israeli decision makers and the military, of course, to retaliate against Iran after Iran fired the largest barrage of ballistic missiles ever at Israel a few days ago, 180 plus missiles. Luckily, no Israelis were killed and only minimal and not very important damage was done to infrastructure. One casualty, a Palestinian man from Gaza who was killed by an intercepted rocket that fell on him in Jericho. But other than that, miraculously, there were no other casualties. So I think that Israel will retaliate, and I think that Israel this time will retaliate strongly in a way that will be painful for the regime, and it will be very different from how Israel refrained from actually retaliating the first time, the 13th and the 14th of April, when Iran attacked the first time. Now, if we go into the different targets and the different things that Israel may do, I think that there are two very important things that we have to be cognizant of. One being, what is the Israeli end game and strategy? As in, what does Israel want to achieve? Because Israel can do many military actions and many kinetic strikes, but it really depends on what Israel wants to achieve. Does Israel want to try to destabilize the Iranian regime? Does it want to start or induce internal instability? Does it want to cripple the Iranian war economy? Does it want to just humiliate the Iranian regime and military?
What do you think? What do you think, Jonathan?
I think that out of an abundance of targets, I think that Israel will first focus on peeling away the defensive capabilities of the Islamic regime, its air defenses and some of its offensive capabilities, its missile bases. And once that is done, I think that Israel will strike a mix of economic related and regime related symbols. Because this strike cannot be a strike that the Iranian regime can hide by only having sustained impacts at faraway secret military installations. I think that what Israel will need to do is to show the Iranian people and make it impossible for the Iranian regime to hide that it has been penetrated and that Israel has struck. So I think that there will be multiple strikes in Iran of different locations of importance. I think that it'll be places that the Iranian regime won't be able to hide. But I also think that there will be very specific military sites and also some of the more economic sites that have an impact on Iran's ability to access external funds, which are part of Iran's ability to provide weapons to the different terrorist organizations around us. The big question remains, what about the nuclear program? And here I think it is a big dilemma, because on one hand, as I said before, I don't think that Israel will have a better circumstance and a better reason, opportunity to strike back at Iran. But then on the other hand, if Israel conducts a strike against Iran's nuclear program, which is very decentralized and dispersed all over Iran in at least 15 different locations, but let's say that Israel focuses on the top 5 locations where weaponization and high-level enrichment are done, according to the intelligence that Israel has, then it may achieve the intended outcome, but it may also hasten the Iranian regime and actually push them towards a quicker breakout and weaponization and more enrichment. So I think that Israel will be very, very careful and strategic when it addresses the nuclear sites. I think that what we will see, at least in the first wave of attacks, will be military targets, regime targets, and some of the economic targets that are very important for the regime and its ability to continue to fund the war against Israel.
And what did you mean by regime-related symbols? Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, if you look at Tehran, the various locations there, the palace where Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, governs from, the headquarters of the IRGC, the Ministry for Internal Security and Abroad Operations, which is where they conduct internal oppression and direct terrorism abroad. The Basij headquarters, of course, hated and despised by many Iranians for sure. There's a lot of targets in Tehran itself, but also all around the country that are symbols of Iran's military establishment, of the IRGC, and of the regime. I don't think that Israel will strike any religious targets, but I think that they will strike targets that are of significant symbolic value to the regime, in order to let Iranians, the Iranian people, know that the regime is weak, not at all as powerful as they would want people to think that they are, and that maybe there are opportunities for the Iranian people.
Let's talk about what you mean by opportunity and some of these women life freedom protesters. How does that factor into Israel's calculations?
I personally think that what we've seen on the streets of Iran in 2016 and 2 years ago in the Mahsa Amini protests on the streets is a very, very brave people. The Iranians obviously, undoubtedly, are very brave. They've taken to the streets and confronted a ruthless and cruel and oppressive regime, trying to shake free from this oppression. But sadly, they never got any external help, not in terms of funding, not in terms of weapons, not in terms of political structure. And eventually, sadly, the regime was able to kill, jail, or otherwise torture and silence people. Now we see the last sham trials and executions of people who were brave enough to stand up against the regime, which is very sad and horrible. And my condolences to the families who have to undergo this suffering. And I think that there's more than one Israeli who is thinking about attacking the regime in such a way that it would perhaps give ideas or send a message to the Iranian people, or people in Iran that are sick and tired of their oppressive regime, that they're not alone, and that maybe there is a different future for the beautiful Iranian people, not the Iranian regime. And it was, I think, interesting that the Israeli Prime Minister chose, in the middle of a war, when there's a million things going on, he chose to send a video recording to the Iranian people and speak about how the fact that they are not the enemy, but the Iranian regime is. If I were part of the Iranian regime, Basij and Revolutionary Guard, I wouldn't have been very happy to see that video.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That was very interesting timing. Beyond going after these targets that you mentioned, is there other ways that Israel would then support the people of Iran who are wanting to overthrow their government?
Yeah, I mean, so far we've discussed the very obvious military, kinetic tools that Israel has at its disposal. We haven't discussed all of it. Israel has a very powerful air force, excellent intelligence, but Israel also has special forces. It has its intelligence agency Mossad, and it has quite capable cyber units that are capable of infiltrating networks in Iran. They have reportedly done it before, and they could be capable of doing it again. And I think that if Israel takes the decision to actually sow havoc and destabilize the Iranian regime, then I think that we would see a combination of many things. We would see kinetic strikes on symbols and centers of gravity of the regime, and of course supported by cyber attacks and other activities that would weaken the regime to such an extent that perhaps it would be possible for the Iranian people to rise up. And I think it's an important point to make here. There's very few examples, if any, of successful external interventions in any country that led to a good succession of power and what you would call regime change. There's not very good examples. And I think it's clear for everybody who's following events in Iran and the Middle East that the only entity that will bring about regime change in Iran is the Iranian people. I think that so far they haven't had any external help, and that is a big factor, but maybe if they will have help, then they'll be able to do so. Last thing to say about that, and I wanted to say that in the beginning when I spoke about Israeli strategy, so there's basically what will determine what Israel will do now in the future is based on two things. One, what does Israel want to achieve long term? What's the end game here? Do we really see a change in Israeli strategy? Does Israel really want to take on Iran, or will this be another small, just check the box kind of counterattack by Israel? I hope not. And the second and very important thing is what kind of support will Israel get from the United States of America? And how willing is the current American administration to be part of an escalation in the area? What does the US understand that it can gain from it? And how supportive will they be of Israeli operations? Will they only supply weapons and diplomatic cover? Or will the US actually get involved in the fighting and suppress incoming rockets and perhaps fire at Iranian military facilities? I don't know. I'm listening to what the administration is saying and following it closely, but these are the two most important things that I think will shape the coming days and, without being too dramatic, future of Iran.
Do you think it's the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic as we know it now?
I think that these days are historic, and I hope that Israel will change 20 years of failed policy towards the Islamic Republic of Iran and actually take on the Islamic Republic and its evil and oppressive regime, to do it in a smart, calculated, and strategic way, one that isn't obvious and doesn't signal what it's going to do, but one that has both economic, diplomatic, information, and military components, and that really applies maximum pressure, not as a slogan, but in reality, on the regime, and uses all of the capabilities at Israel's disposal in such a way to first and foremost force the Iranian regime to stop funding terror activities against Israel. I think that's the number one priority. And the second one would be related to nuclear, and the third one would be related to the regime itself. And these are I think, three issues that are hurting Israel the most, and I think that's where Israel should prioritize its efforts.
Speaking of the regime, do you foresee Israel going after regime officials the way it did Hassan Nasrallah with Hezbollah?
Yeah, I'm not sure that Israel has quite the same level of intel when it comes to Iranian officials, especially not when they're in Iran. When they're in Syria or in Lebanon, In other locations, Israel probably has better intelligence. I think there's a certain gap here. But I think that in principle, yes, that is something that is possible. I wouldn't rule it out. Of course, that would have consequences, but we've seen already that the Iranians have been plotting and trying to assassinate Israeli leaders for some time by using local minorities in Israel, by trying to infiltrate into Israel and plant bombs and IEDs. So that wouldn't be something that is unprecedented. And I think that the Iranian senior leadership is quite wary of it. So it's definitely on the table.
You just mentioned intel. How well does Israel know Iran?
We'll only be able to answer that question in hindsight once we've seen how events unfold. Judging from Israel's activities so far against Iranian officers, Revolutionary Guard in Syria, and of course reported cyber activities against the nuclear program, assassination of scientists, and the last elimination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran about a month or so ago, they would indicate that there is a lot of intel and that Israel has a fairly good understanding and operational capabilities when it comes to operating inside Iran. But I would, of course, be cautious. Iran, the Revolutionary Guard, and the regime, they're serious, highly disciplined, compartmentalized, ruthless, and I think that it is a difficult task, but I think that Israel has proven that it has quite a lot of intel and offensive capabilities.
And when it comes to Iran's arsenal, what is it like? Did they use most of their ballistic missiles recently and in April, or do you have an idea of what the arsenal is like in Iran?
Oh, they have a massive arsenal of ballistic missiles that are capable of traveling to Israel and southeastern Europe. They are nowhere near depleted in terms of their arsenal, and they have missiles that I think can go further. This brings to mind a senior fellow at FDD. He's also Iranian, Benham Ben Taleblu. He's an expert on Iranian weapons, and he wrote a very, very comprehensive summary on the Iranian missile program, which is available at FDD's website, fdd.org, where there's detailed analysis of where they're located, how big they are, what their range is, the technology, where they come from, etc. And I would recommend reading it. I learned a lot from reading it, even though I didn't understand everything that was written. But bottom line, Iran, the Revolutionary Guard, has thousands of ballistic missiles similar to the ones that were fired on Israel on the 2nd of October. And they also have quite developed air defenses. And these are two components of the IRGC that Israel will definitely prioritize to deal with.
You know, I have a lot of people asking me as an Iranian Canadian with regards to October 2nd, what was the Islamic Republic of Iran thinking? What is your assessment? What were you think that they were thinking when they did this?
I think they were thinking that they were going to get away with it again because America will stop Israel from retaliating. And I think that this time they miscalculated, even though the Iranians are very smart and very strategic thinkers and planners. I think they miscalculated, they overestimated their own capabilities, and they underestimated Israeli resolve. Maybe they started to believe in their own propaganda, which is a very dangerous thing to do. And I think they underestimated Israeli resolve. And I think that in the coming days, they will start to learn exactly how bad they miscalculated.
So how does this differ then from the April attack?
It was focused, it was a lot more only ballistic missiles, as to the last time it was a mix of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones and rockets. This time it was only ballistic missiles that travel very fast and are quite large and lethal. And this one was focused on mostly air bases and Mossad headquarters in northern Tel Aviv. Both of the attacks failed, and most of the rockets and missiles were intercepted on both occasions. But I think that what the Iranians tried to do this time was to overwhelm Israeli air defenses with an abundance of incoming missiles.
And just to wrap things up, Jonathan, already President Biden has said that he doesn't support Israel targeting nuclear sites in Iran. Do you feel, as an Israeli, do you feel supported by the United States? I mean, of course, the United States is supporting Israel, and they always have, but do you feel supported enough?
Well, I think that there's an opportunity here. I think that this is an opportunity for the free world, for the West, to dial back the Iranian regime's illicit and aggressive behavior. If the West is brave and really wants to change the trajectory of the Middle East, then this is the best opportunity to actually engage the Iranian regime and weaken it and perhaps force regime change. And if the West isn't interested in that and it just wants to improve the situation, the security situation in the Middle East, and it doesn't care about the Iranian people, then there's also an opportunity to do it. Luckily for the West, Israel is more than willing to bear the brunt of the fighting and engage the Iranian regime. I don't think Israel is asking for the Europeans to send fighter jets or for anybody else to do anything of substance. What Israel needs is supply of weapons and parts and fuel and diplomatic support from the United States of America. And I think there's an opportunity here that shouldn't be wasted. There's an opportunity here for America to show its strength, its leadership in the world, to be totally on the right side of history, and to do good for the region, good for America, and good for the Iranian people.
Do you feel that they will, though?
I hope so, and I have faith.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You can always weigh in on the discussion in the comments below. We'd love to know what you think, and hit the like button. The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.